Number 1. The Byford Dolphin Decompression. In the autumn of 1983, a semi-submersible rig called the Byford Dolphin sat over the Frigg gas field in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea. On board, a small team of men lived inside a world most people never imagine. They were saturation divers. Their bodies were pressurized to match the seabed far below, and they would stay that way for weeks at a time. They slept, ate, and waited inside steel chambers no larger than a camper van. To reach their worksite, they rode a diving bell down through the cold, dark water. To come home, they would decompress slowly over days. Saturation diving exists because of a simple biological fact. Once a diver's tissues are fully loaded with gas at a given pressure, the decompression time stays the same whether the diver works for 1 day or 1 month. So crews live at pressure for the whole job, breathing a special mix. At these depths, they breathe heliox, a blend of helium and oxygen, because ordinary nitrogen would make them dangerously confused. Helium also makes their voices high and squeaky, a strange detail of a strange life. The whole arrangement trades comfort for efficiency, and it rests entirely on flawless control of pressure. On November 5th, 1983, that careful system failed in an instant. The chamber complex was pressurized to roughly 9 atmospheres. That is the pressure you would feel at about 90 meters of depth. At that pressure, the gas dissolved in a diver's blood, and tissue is held there by sheer force. Release it slowly, and the diver is fine. Release it suddenly, and the physics turns lethal. 4 divers were inside the system. Their names were Edwin Coward, Roy Lucas, Björn Gaver Bergersen, and Truls Hellevik. 2 tenders worked outside the chambers, handling the clamps and hatches. They were William Crammond and Martin Saunders. The diving bell had just returned from a dive. The normal procedure was strict. First, seal the trunk between the bell and the living chamber. Only then, open the clamp. That order was broken. A clamp connecting the bell to the chamber was opened while the system was still fully pressurized. The trunk was not sealed. In a fraction of a second, the pressure dropped from about 9 atmospheres to a single atmosphere. The energy released was enormous. William Crammond was struck by the moving bell and killed. Martin Saunders was badly injured but survived. Inside, the 3 divers nearest the chamber died from the violent pressure drop. Autopsies later found that the rapid change had forced fat out of their blood and into their vessels and organs. The dissolved gas in their bodies had boiled out of solution all at once. Truls Hellevik stood closest to the partially open clamp. The escaping pressure forced him through a crescent-shaped gap measured at about 60 centimeters. His body was destroyed instantly. The forensic detail of that death is grim, and it is still studied in dive medicine and pathology as the most extreme example of explosive decompression on record. There is debate about blame. The original Norwegian investigation pointed to human error by the tenders. A later reassessment, raised publicly around 2008 and 2009, argued that a faulty clamp or a missing safety interlock may have played a part. That second view matters because it shifts responsibility away from a dead man who could not defend himself. Modern saturation systems now use clamps that physically cannot open while under pressure. In 2009, the Norwegian government finally agreed to compensate the bereaved families decades after the loss. The Byford Dolphin shows something the deep sea proves again and again. It does not need teeth or jaws to kill. It only needs pressure and a single moment of human error. Number 2. The Johnson Sea Link tragedy. Pressure can kill in an instant. It can also kill slowly, inside a hull that never breaks. That is the horror of the Johnson Sea Link. The submersible belonged to the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution in Florida. The institution was founded by the inventor Edwin Link and the philanthropist J. Seward Johnson. Their submersible, built in 1971, had an unusual design. The pilot and 1 observer sat in a clear acrylic sphere at the front. 2 more crew rode in a separate aluminum chamber at the back. On June 17, 1973, the Johnson Sea Link descended off Key West. The target was a wreck, the destroyer USS Fred T. Barry, which had been sunk to serve as an artificial reef. It lay at about 360 feet, roughly 110 meters down. 4 men were aboard. The pilot Archibald Menzies and the scientist Robert Meek sat in the forward sphere. Albert Stover and Edwin Clayton Link rowed in the aft chamber. Edwin Clayton Link was 31 years old. He was the son of the institution's founder. The dive went wrong when the submersible drifted into the wreck and became trapped against its structure. It could not rise. The forward sphere. Occupants stayed relatively safe. The aft chamber did not. Its system for scrubbing carbon dioxide from the air could not keep up. The deep water was cold, and that cold reduced the efficiency of the chemical absorbent. Carbon dioxide began to build. Carbon dioxide poisoning is insidious. It brings headache, then confusion, then unconsciousness. The victims often do not grasp how much danger they are in. In the aft chamber, Edwin Clayton Link and Albert Stover slowly succumbed. They died from carbon dioxide poisoning made worse by hypothermia. The entrapment lasted on the order of 31 hours before the submersible was recovered. The two men in the forward sphere were brought up alive. The two in the back were not. What followed was a quiet revolution in safety. The era simply had no rapid system for rescuing a trapped submersible. Edwin Link, grieving the death of his son, turned that grief into engineering. He devoted later work to building a remote rescue device that could reach and free a stranded vessel. The lesson of the Sea Link is uncomfortable. We picture deep-sea death as a sudden implosion, a hull crushed in a heartbeat. The reality is often slower and stranger. A vessel can sit perfectly intact on the seabed while the air inside it turns poisonous. The men inside are unhurt by pressure. They're simply waiting, in a sound, dry hull, for an end they can feel approaching. Number 3. The DSV Alvin Swordfish attack. Not every deep-sea danger is mechanical. Some are alive and some are absurd. Consider what happened to Alvin. Alvin is a crewed deep submergence vehicle operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. It was commissioned in 1964, and it changed deep science. For the first time, researchers could ride down to the seabed and look out with their own eyes. Alvin would later survey the wreck of the Titanic and the strange life around hydrothermal vents. In July of 1967, Alvin was diving off the southeastern United States, around 2,000 feet, roughly 600 meters down. There, a swordfish struck the submersible. The fish drove its long bill into a seam between sections of Alvin's outer fiberglass fairing, and it stuck fast. The crew could not shake it loose. So they did the only thing they could. They surfaced with the swordfish still attached. On deck, the fish was removed. By most accounts, the crew then cooked and ate it. It sounds like a tall tale, but it fits the animal. Swordfish are powerful pelagic predators. They can exceed 4 meters in length and weigh hundreds of kilograms. Their bill is a fused, elongated upper jaw used to slash through schools of prey. Swordfish have been documented ramming boats and other objects. A high-speed strike from one is no small thing. The encounter prompted a serious thought beneath the funny story. Submersibles carry exposed fittings and seams, and the deep is not empty. It is full of fast, strong, living things that may treat a strange machine as a rival or a meal. Alvin's story took a darker turn the next year. In October of 1968, the submersible sank during launch when its support cables failed. The crew escaped. Alvin sat on the seabed at about 5,000 feet for nearly a year. When it was recovered in 1969, the crew found their lunch still aboard. The sandwiches were nearly intact. That small, eerie detail gave early evidence of how slowly things decay in the cold, dark deep. Alvin still works today. Its depth rating has been pushed to around 6,500 meters after a major overhaul, and the swordfish remains one of the only documented cases of a fish attacking and briefly disabling a crewed research submarine. The deep, it turns out, can bite back. Number 4. The Delta P phenomenon. A living animal you can at least see. The next killer is invisible. Divers call it Delta P, and it is one of the deadliest forces in the water. Delta P is shorthand for a pressure differential. It is the difference in water pressure between two connected bodies of water. The danger appears wherever water can flow through an opening. Think of intake pipes, dam sluices, the sea chests of ships, valves, and submerged drains. On one side, still water. On the other, a path for that water to rush through. Between them, a difference in pressure. The physics is simple, and that is what makes it terrifying. Force equals the pressure difference multiplied by the area it acts on. Even a modest difference spread across a large opening produces forces of many tons. No human muscle can fight that. A diver drawn against an intake is pinned in place. The more the water pulls, the tighter the grip becomes. In the worst cases, soft tissue can be forced through openings far smaller than a human body. The cruelest part is how calm it looks. Water near a delta P hazard can appear perfectly still. There is no churning, no warning. A diver may not know the danger is there until the suction has already taken hold. This is why professional dive training devotes whole modules to delta P. The first rule is to identify the hazard before entering the water. The second rule is to confirm and lock off all flow, a process called lockout-tagout, before any dive near intakes or gates. Engineers add trash racks and grates over openings, partly to keep divers and debris from being drawn in. There's a hard truth in rescue. Once a diver is caught in a delta P, pulling harder does almost nothing. The only reliable rescue is to stop the flow entirely. Until the water stops moving, the force does not relent. Documented fatalities have occurred at hydroelectric dams, at nuclear plant cooling intakes, and in industrial water systems. Standpipes, culverts, and flooded tunnels are all recognized as high-risk environments. And because the public and many recreational divers have never heard of delta P, it explains a number of otherwise baffling drownings in water that looked completely safe. It is one of the main reasons commercial diving ranks among the most dangerous jobs there is. To feel the scale, picture a single opening 1 meter across, with even a small pressure difference across it. The resulting force can reach several tons, pressing in one direction with no pause and no mercy. A diver caught against it cannot push free because the water behind keeps feeding the pull. Rescuers on the surface can do nothing useful by hauling on a line. The only answer is to find the valve or pump driving the flow and shut it down. Until then, the trap holds. The deep does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits in a quiet pipe. Number 5. The Grand Banks turbidity current. A pipe can kill one diver. The deep sea can move on a scale that is hard to picture at all. On November 18, 1929, the ocean floor proved it. That day, an earthquake of about magnitude 7.2 struck the Laurentian slope, Samisenk Alpet Ikmaikio. South of the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, the shaking triggered a massive submarine landslide. As the loosened sediment slid downslope, it mixed with water and transformed into something else. It became a turbidity current, a dense avalanche of sediment-laden water racing along the seabed. No one saw it. The deep is dark and unwatched. But this current left a record, and the record was extraordinary. Crossing the slope were 12 transatlantic telegraph cables, the communication lifelines of their age. The current snapped them, one after another, and because each cable break cut a circuit at a telegraph station, the exact moment of each break was time-stamped. Decades later, 2 scientists realized what those time-stamps meant. Bruce Heezen and Maurice Ewing studied the sequence of breaks in a landmark paper published in 1952. They knew where each cable lay. They knew when each one failed. From that, they could calculate the speed of the unseen current. The numbers were staggering. Near the source, the current may have moved at 60 to 100 kilometers per hour. It did not stop quickly. The current traveled on the order of 600 to 1,000 kilometers across the abyssal plain. The flow lasted around 13 hours from start to the most distant break. When it finally settled, it had blanketed an area estimated at roughly 100,000 square miles of seafloor with a single graded layer of sediment. This was the first hard proof that turbidity currents were real, powerful, and capable of crossing an entire ocean basin. It founded the modern understanding of these flows and of turbidites, the layered deposits they leave behind. It reframed deep canyons and fans as the products of repeated catastrophic flows, not slow, gentle settling. There was a human cost above the waves as well. The same earthquake generated a tsunami that struck the Burn Peninsula of Newfoundland. The waves surged into coastal communities with little warning, and about 28 people were killed. It remains the deadliest event of its kind in the region's recorded history. The work of Heezen and Ewing, carried out at the Lamont Geological Observatory, became a cornerstone of marine geology. Their cable analysis is still taught as a classic example of reading a hidden event from indirect clues. Before 1929, many scientists doubted that currents could carve the deep canyons seen on the seabed. The Grand Banks event ended that doubt. It showed that the abyss is shaped by sudden, violent floods of sediment, repeated across geological time. Modern instruments have since caught turbidity currents in the act. In places like the Congo and Monterey Canyons, they confirm what snapped cables first revealed in 1929. The seafloor is not a still and silent place. It can come alive with sudden, violent force on a scale that dwarfs anything a human structure can withstand. Number 6. The sharks that bite undersea. Cables. Cables once clocked a deep-sea disaster. Cables also became targets. The story sounds like a joke, but it is documented fact. Sharks have attacked the cables that carry the world's internet. Start with the stakes. Submarine cables carry the overwhelming majority of intercontinental data and communications traffic. When you send a message across an ocean, it almost certainly travels through a cable on the seabed, not a satellite. These cables are the physical backbone of the connected world. In the 1980s, engineers noticed a problem. New fiber optic cables were suffering faults that had no obvious cause. When sections were hauled up and examined, the answer was startling. There were shark teeth embedded in the insulation and bite marks on the sheathing. Incidents in the mid-1980s involving AT&T fiber cables near the Canary Islands were among the first clearly attributed to sharks. One species implicated was the crocodile shark, a small, deep-dwelling predator. Why would a shark bite a cable? Here the explanations diverge, and each is worth weighing. The leading hypothesis points to electroreception. Sharks have sensory organs called the ampullae of Lorenzini, which detect weak electric fields. In nature, those fields betray the muscle activity of hidden prey. A powered cable produces a faint electromagnetic field of its own. The idea is that this field resembles a living signal, and the shark bites to investigate. A second explanation is more mundane. Lighter fiber optic cables could suspend off the seabed, swaying in the current where sharks were more likely to encounter them. The bite might be simple curiosity or aggression toward an unfamiliar object. A third view simply notes that several deep species were implicated, suggesting more than one cause and more than one culprit. The engineering response was clear regardless of motive. Manufacturers wrapped cables in steel tape and tough protective sheathing. Reports in 2014 indicated that companies including Google were adding protective material to some cables, partly with sharks in mind. It is worth keeping perspective. Industry data show that shark bites are a small fraction of total cable faults. The large majority of damage comes from ship anchors and fishing gear, not wildlife. Still, a single fault can disrupt internet and financial connectivity for an entire region until a repair ship locates the break, grapples the cable up from the seabed, and splices it. That work can take days and cost a great deal. The image lingers. The cables that bind our civilization together run across a wilderness floor through a darkness full of teeth. Number 7. The 52 Hertz whale. The deep carries our voices through cables. It also carries voices of its own. One of them has been calling, alone, for decades. In 1989, the United States Navy's SOSUS hydrophone arrays in the North Pacific picked up an unusual sound. It was a whale call, but at the wrong frequency. The animal sang at around 52 Hertz. That number is the heart of the mystery. Blue whales typically call between about 10 and 39 Hertz. Fin whales call around 20 Hertz. A large baleen whale calling at 52 Hertz is strikingly, almost impossibly high. The researcher William Watkins of Woods Hole studied the animal closely. Because no other whale was known to answer at that frequency, the media gave it a name that stuck. They called it the loneliest whale in the world. The image was irresistible. A single creature singing in a voice no one of its kind could share. Watkins and his team tracked the whale acoustically across roughly 12 years, from 1992 to 2004. Its seasonal movements broadly matched the migration timing of blue and fin whales in the North Pacific. Over those years, the call frequency drifted slightly downward, which is consistent with an aging animal. What is it? Here, the theories compete. One idea is that the whale is a hybrid, a cross between a blue whale and a fin whale, with a voice that belongs fully to neither. A second idea is that it has a deformity in its vocal anatomy, producing an off-pitch call. A third, simpler view holds that it is just an unusual individual within the natural range of variation we do not yet understand. The honest answer is that no one knows. The whale has never been seen or photographed. It is known only through sound. Watkins published the definitive study in 2004, the same year he died. The story later inspired a documentary released in 2021 titled The Loneliest Whale: The Search for 52. Scientists urge a note of caution against the sad legend. The whale may not be lonely at all. Other whales could still hear it and might even respond, even if they do not match its frequency. Some later data even hinted at the possibility of more than one source at similar pitches. What the case shows most clearly is how military hardware became a tool of biology. Hydrophones built to hunt submarines instead preserved one strange animal's voice for over a decade. The calls are loud and powerful, which tells us the animal is large and healthy, not sickly. And the deep sound channel carried that voice across vast distances so that we could hear it at all. Number 8, the Julia sound. A strange voice can have a backstory. Some deep-sea sounds have none at all, at least not at first. On March 1st, 1999, an instrument array recorded a sound that no one could immediately identify. The recording came from NOAA's Equatorial Pacific Autonomous Hydrophone Array. The sound lasted roughly 15 seconds. And it was loud. It was loud enough to be heard across the entire array, which spanned a wide stretch of the eastern equatorial Pacific. Researchers gave it a name. They called it Julia. The PMEL acoustics program, associated with the researcher Christopher Fox, cataloged Julia alongside a small family of other unexplained recordings. These had names that have since entered popular culture. There was the bloop, the train, the slowdown, the whistle, and the upsweep. Many of them came from hydrophones repurposed from Cold War submarine detection networks. For a time, Julia and its siblings fueled wild speculation. If a sound was louder than any known animal, perhaps it came from some unknown giant in the deep. That idea was thrilling, and it spread far beyond the labs. The science told a quieter story. NOAA's leading explanation for Julia is that it was produced by a large iceberg running aground off Antarctica. When a massive iceberg scrapes and grinds against the seafloor, it generates powerful, sustained low-frequency sound. The most famous of the family, the bloop, was later attributed to ice quakes, the cracking and fracturing of Antarctic ice. The mysteries did not point to monsters. They pointed to ice. That resolution is itself a lesson. The deep sound channel can carry acoustic energy across thousands of kilometers. A single grounding iceberg far away at the bottom of the world can shout across an entire ocean and be heard by instruments near the equator. NOAA released spectrograms of these sounds publicly, and studying them advanced our understanding of cryogenic and seismic ocean acoustics. We now recognize Antarctic ice dynamics, calving, and grounding as a major source of mysterious ocean noise. Julia shows how a signal can stay a mystery for years before a mundane explanation arrives. And even with the iceberg answer in hand, it keeps its eerie quality. The ocean's soundscape is mostly uncatalogued. There are voices down there we have not yet learned to name. Number 9. The Cuvier's Beaked Whale. Sonar Strandings. A sound can be a mystery to us. To other creatures, a sound can be lethal. This is the darkest encounter on the list because here, human noise kills the deepest divers in the sea. Cuvier's beaked whale is one of the most extreme deep divers known to science. A study published in 2014 documented a record dive of nearly 2,992 meters, lasting over 2 hours. These whales are elusive. They spend most of their lives at great depth and are rarely seen at the surface. Beginning in the 1990s and 2000s, scientists noticed a disturbing pattern. Clusters of beaked whale strandings kept coinciding with naval exercises that used mid-frequency active sonar. The timing and location were too close to ignore. In March of 2000, a mass stranding in the Bahamas involved about 17 cetaceans during a United States Navy sonar exercise. Necropsies of the dead whales revealed hemorrhaging in and around their ears and brains. Then, in September of 2002, 14 beaked whales stranded in the Canary Islands during a NATO naval exercise. A study published in the journal Nature in 2003, led by Paul Jepson, reported something startling in those whales. They showed gas and fat embolism, injuries that resemble decompression sickness, the bends. How could that happen? The theories converge on a frightening picture, though they differ in detail. The leading hypothesis is that intense sonar disrupts the whale's careful dive behavior. Panicked, they may surface too quickly, and nitrogen bubbles form in their tissues, just as they would in a human diver who rose too fast. A complementary mechanism is direct acoustic trauma, the sheer physical shock of the sound, along with fear-driven flight. Mid-frequency active sonar operates in a range that overlaps with beaked whale hearing, which makes them especially exposed. The findings sparked years of legal conflict. In the United States, the Natural Resources Defense Council fought the Navy over sonar use. The dispute reached the Supreme Court in 2008 in the case Winter versus Natural Resources Defense Council, which weighed training needs against environmental harm. Beaked whales appear uniquely vulnerable, likely because of the extreme physiology that lets them dive so deep. After Spain banned naval sonar exercises around the Canary Islands, the beaked whale strandings there reportedly stopped. Controlled studies have since shown beaked whales fleeing and ceasing to feed when exposed to sonar. The larger question remains open: what is the cumulative cost of all our noise on the hidden life of the deep? It is an encounter where an unseen animal miles down pays the price for what we do at the surface. Number 10. The Kursk Disaster. Noise can harm the creatures below, but down in those depths men have waited too. The Kursk is the most recognizable disaster on this list, and its core horror is the slowest one of all. The K-141, Kursk, was an Oscar II-class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine of the Russian Northern Fleet. It was among the largest attack submarines ever built, commissioned in 1994. On August 12, 2000, it was taking part in a major naval exercise in the Barents Sea. The disaster began with an explosion. The first blast involved a practice torpedo, and it was attributed to a leak of high-test peroxide, a volatile propellant. Roughly 2 minutes later, a second far larger explosion tore through the bow as multiple torpedo warheads detonated. That second blast was so powerful it registered on seismographs as far away as Alaska, equivalent to several tons of high explosive. The submarine sank to the seabed at a depth of about 108 meters. Of the 118 crew aboard, all would ultimately die. But not all of them died at once. This is the part that makes the Kursk unbearable to think about. An estimated 23 sailors survived the initial explosions. They gathered in the rear 9th compartment of the submarine, in the dark, on the bottom of the sea. We know they survived because one of them wrote it down. A note by Lieutenant Captain Dmitry Kolesnikov was later recovered. It recorded that men were alive in the compartment after the sinking, that several had moved aft, and that they were waiting. It is a quiet, devastating document of men keeping order and hope in total darkness. What happened next became an international scandal. The Russian Navy delayed and resisted accepting foreign rescue assistance. Norwegian and British teams were eventually permitted to help, but only after the survivors had died. When Norwegian divers finally opened the rear escape hatch days later, they found the compartment flooded. The secrecy and the slow response drew intense criticism at home and abroad. President Vladimir Putin faced public anger over the handling of the crisis, including a notorious television exchange in which he summarized the fate of the submarine with a flat phrase: "It sank." There were other hard questions about the response. Critics asked why Russia waited so long to ask for help, and whether faster action could have reached the men in the 9th compartment. Officials offered shifting accounts of when the crew died, and early claims that most died instantly were later contradicted by the recovered note. The truth, that some men lived for hours and perhaps longer, made the delay far harder to forgive. The wreck was raised in 2001 in a complex salvage operation led by Dutch firms, and there was a grim historical echo. The high-test peroxide propellant blamed for the first explosion had a deadly past. It was implicated in the loss of the British submarine HMS Sidon back in 1955. The Kursk stands now as a modern symbol of the cruelest fate the deep can offer. Not a quick death, but survival, followed by a long wait for a rescue that never comes in time. Run back through these encounters and a single force keeps reappearing. It is pressure. The deep ocean is defined by it, and pressure is the quiet author of much of the horror we have seen. The basic rule is steady and unforgiving. Pressure increases by roughly 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth. By 90 meters, the depth of the Byford Dolphin's chamber pressure, the force on every surface is about 9 times what it is at sea level. The human body can actually tolerate enormous pressure, as long as that pressure is steady and balanced. What the body cannot tolerate is rapid change. This is the thread that ties the divers and the whales together. Gases dissolve into blood and tissue under pressure. Bring the pressure down slowly, and those gases ease out safely. Bring it down fast, and they boil out as bubbles. In a saturation diver, that is explosive decompression. In a panicked beaked whale forced to surface too quickly, it is gas embolism. The same physics, the same bends, in a steel chamber and in a living animal a mile down. Delta P is a different face of the same master force. It is not about absolute depth, but about a difference in pressure between two places. A small difference across a wide opening becomes a crushing, inescapable pull. Calm water hides it completely. The sea link reminds us that pressure is not the only deep sea killer. Sometimes the hull holds, the pressure stays balanced, and the air itself turns poisonous instead. The Kursk reminds us that a hull can survive a sinking only for water and cold and time to finish what an explosion started. This is why deep diving animals evolved remarkable solutions. Beaked whales have collapsible lungs and other adaptations that let them manage extreme pressure on every dive. Humans have no such gift. We must carry our balance of pressure with us in chambers and breathing mixes like heliox, and we must manage it perfectly. Engineers rate pressure hulls for a crush depth and test them carefully because the margin for error shrinks with every meter of descent. The deepest lesson is the one Delta P teaches best. In the deep, the most dangerous forces are often the ones you cannot see. Still water can hold many tons of pull. A balanced pressure can turn lethal the instant it changes. The ocean does not need to look violent to be deadly. There is a second thread running through these stories, and it is made of sound. To understand it, we have to go back to the Cold War, when nations learned to listen to the sea. The key system was called SOSUS, a network of hydrophones laid on the seabed to track enemy submarines. Its genius lay in exploiting a natural feature of the ocean called the Deep Sound Channel, also known as the SOFAR channel. This is a layer of water at depth where sound travels with very little loss. A noise that enters the channel can travel for thousands of kilometers. SOSUS turned that channel into a giant listening device. Almost by accident, those military ears became instruments of discovery. The 52 Hertz whale was first detected on SOSUS arrays. NOAA's later autonomous hydrophone arrays, descended from the same lineage of technology, captured the sound called Julia. Hydrophones built for war revealed whale songs, the cracking of distant ice quakes, and the seismic groans of the seafloor itself. The deep sound channel that makes all this possible is a real feature of the water column. Sound travels at different speeds depending on temperature and pressure. At a certain depth, those effects combine to create a layer where sound bends back toward the middle rather than escaping. A noise trapped in that layer can circle the globe's oceans with very little energy lost. Whales appear to use it deliberately, sending low calls across whole basins to reach others of their kind. The Navy realized the same channel could carry the faint sound of an enemy propeller for hundreds of kilometers, and SOSUS was born from that insight. It helps to separate two kinds of sound. Passive systems like SOSUS simply listen. They emit nothing. They are how we heard the lonely whale and the grounding icebergs. Active sonar is different. It emits powerful pulses of sound and listens for the echo. That is the technology linked to the beaked whale strandings. The same broad science that let us hear the deep also, in its active form, can harm the creatures living there. It is a sharp irony, and it sits at the center of this video. Cables form yet another layer of human presence in the deep, and they tie back to the same theme. The shark-bitten fiber optic lines and the telegraph cables snapped in 1929 are both infrastructure laid across a wilderness. We string our communications through a place we barely understand, and the wilderness pushes back. Secrecy shaped all of it. Naval priorities controlled what the public learned about the deep for decades, from the capabilities of SOSUS to the truth of the Kursk. Cold War spending funded oceanography in ways that were rarely advertised. And military limitations shape tragedy, as when rescue capabilities and national pride collided over a sunken submarine. The instruments of conflict opened the deep to science. They also reveal how tangled our relationship with that world has become. The title of this video makes a promise. These encounters were too disturbing to make the news. It is worth asking honestly why that is true. The answer is rarely a single dramatic cover-up. It is usually a stack of quieter reasons. The first is simply that some stories are too graphic. The forensic reality of the Byford Dolphin is hard to broadcast. News outlets shy away from detail that disturbing, so the event survives in technical papers rather than headlines. The second reason is structural. Industrial accidents are often handled internally within companies and regulators with limited public coverage. Corporate and legal liability tends to push events toward quiet settlements rather than open reckonings. The decades-long delay before the Byford Dolphin families were compensated shows how slowly the full story can surface. The third reason is secrecy of a more deliberate kind. Military priorities suppress details in the Kursk Disaster and in the Sonar Strandings. Information that touches national security moves slowly, if it moves at all. The fourth reason is complexity. Delta P, turbidity currents, gas embolism in whales, the deep sound channel. These are technical subjects hard to report accurately in a short segment. A story that takes 10 minutes to explain rarely leads a broadcast. There's also the problem of visibility. Slow disasters like the Sea Link entrapment and the Kursk survivors produce no dramatic live footage. Deep sea events happen out of sight, with no witnesses and no cameras. Scientific caution adds further delay, as it did with Julia, where researchers waited years before settling on the iceberg explanation. And sensational early framing, like the monster theories around the bloop, often gets quietly corrected later, long after the public has moved on. It is important to be fair here. Most of these stories are not buried by conspiracy. They are buried by distance, by complexity, and by our own discomfort. Niche professional communities hold the knowledge, and the public simply never goes looking. Yet it is also true that some institutions genuinely minimized or delayed what they disclosed. The honest conclusion sits between cynicism and naivety. The deep hides its stories through a mix of real secrecy and ordinary neglect. For all that we have learned, the most striking fact about the deep sea is how little of it we have actually seen. We have mapped the surface of other worlds in finer detail than our own seabed. Only a handful of people have ever ridden a submersible to the deepest places on Earth. The open questions in these very stories prove the point. The 52 Hertz whale has never been seen, only heard. We still do not know whether it is a hybrid, a deformed individual, or simply unusual. We do not even know for certain that it is alone, since other whales might hear and answer it. New hydrophone networks keep detecting fresh signals that we cannot immediately explain, the way Julia once defied explanation. The physical processes are just as open. We still do not fully know how often turbidity currents like the one in 1929 sweep the seabed today. Modern instruments have only recently caught a few of them in the act. We cannot yet measure the full cumulative impact of human noise on beaked whales and other deep divers. We know individual strandings, but the long-term toll is hidden. Whole categories of life remain barely studied. Many deep-diving species are known from only a few sightings or strandings. The majority of the seafloor's terrain and the exact routes of many submarine cables across it are poorly charted. Even well-understood physics still kills, as Delta P does, because the deep gives no margin for a single mistake. There is reason for hope. Autonomous vehicles are extending our reach without risking human lives. Environmental DNA sampling and acoustic monitoring are revealing hidden biodiversity, but rescue and recovery at depth remain as hard in principle as they ever were, and climate change is now altering deep currents, the sounds of melting ice and the habitats of deep creatures, faster than we can document them. Every answer down there seems to open new questions. The deep remains, by a wide margin, the least explored part of our planet. There is a strange comfort and a strange unease in how the ocean remembers. It keeps records, whether or not anyone is there to read them. In 1929, 12 snapped cables unintentionally clocked an avalanche no human eye ever saw. On the Kursk, a single handwritten note preserved the final hours of men in the dark. For over a decade, a hydrophone held the voice of a lonely whale, a sound that might otherwise have vanished into the water unheard. The deep records what the surface forgets. Run your mind back over these encounters and the same elements return. Pressure, cold, and darkness shape every one of them. They are the unchanging conditions of a place that was never meant for us. And still we go. Divers, aquanauts, and submariners keep pushing into a world that offers no air, no light, and no second chances. That takes a particular kind of courage, and it carries a particular kind of risk. The ocean itself is indifferent. It is neither cruel nor kind. It simply applies its physics without mercy or malice. The animals that call the abyss home live by those same rules, and they pay when our noise and our machines intrude on their silence. Our technology reveals this world and endangers it in the same motion. Perhaps that is why these stories unsettle us so deeply. They happen where we cannot follow, in a place we cannot survive unaided. It would be easy to let them stay buried, too disturbing, too technical, too far away to matter. But there is value in remembering quiet disasters rather than letting them sink without a trace. They are the price of exploration, and they are a warning to respect what we explore. What future explorers will record down there, we cannot yet know. The deep is the planet's largest unwritten archive, and most of its pages have never been turned. So sit for a moment with the scale of what remains unknown beneath the waves. The ocean is patient. It keeps its records in the dark, whether or not we ever come to read them.